I find it interesting that sometimes profitability, productivity there's a perception that it's at odds with ecological outcomes, biodiversity, and we don't see that. Like, maybe that's the case sometimes, but we run a pretty hard bar over any decision we make.
I'm Jacinta, and this is my husband Adam, and we farm here in Miriam Vale with our two boys. We've got 2,500 hectares of cattle property.
Our strategy, certainly early on, was really based around finances or lack thereof, and I guess we're no different to a lot of other producers in the sense that we're on a pretty tight budget. We certainly, after getting the lay of the land, put together a whole farm plan, I suppose, and that evolves. It's not something we set in concrete in the first year and then everything happens that way.
Well, the trees are a classic example because we hadn't actually planned to knock over the plantation timber. We sort of thought 5 years' time we'd probably have enough capital behind us to do that. And it became pretty apparent that we couldn't run cattle with them up, so we decided it had to happen a bit sooner rather than later. So we sort of had to rejuggle the plan around, and as Adam said, that kind of happens all the time. We've got our budget is a very malleable spreadsheet.
And it has to be when you're dealing with the seasonal variability. I mean, we had the water plan, you could say was the same thing. We had a water articulation plan, which was originally going to be implemented over a 5+ year period, was all brought forward into 2 years because we've had, very much below average rainfall. So we put down 6 bores and we reticulated to most paddocks because we've had no surface water. The way we run our cattle, we run them in big mobs, so clean water is crucial. So really that's just been a conversation with the bank. So now every dollar we spend, I guess, is really focusing on making a return. So if it doesn't do that, we don't spend it. So we've invested in a disc seeder, boom spray. We're doing pasture renovation. We've mucked around with we're going down that multi-species line, I suppose, and we renovated it. We've done nearly 100 hectares this year, up to sort of 12, sometimes 15 species in a paddock, and really that's about boosting production, obviously, and diet variability for our cattle, but it's probably also more about getting our soils ticking and getting the soil biology working in our favour so that we can start to get this cycle happening again.
So along with the pasture development, we've been using lots of different technologies. We've been using grazing charts for a little while now. I basically worked out what were the basic items that we needed to record for that. And then 2 years down the track, when I had my head around it and I knew what they were about, I actually went back and I had all the information and I was able to go through it, and I finished a grazing chart for each year. And so we've been able to look back and see what our starting point was and how we've improved since then. On the soil and pasture side, Phil at SIBO Labs has been fantastic, and this fantastic satellite technology where the satellite passes over every 5 days and takes a picture of the whole property. And then every 3 passes, that information's all amalgamated and we get a report. It's fascinating. We can see what grasses are photosynthesising, what's growing, what's not growing.
Kilos of dry matter per hectare.
Yeah, kilos of dry matter. When cattle are taken out, we can see where they've grazed that pasture, and we might say, oh, those cattle aren't wanting to go up in that back corner. But then when we get the report, we can see that it's actually true, and there's so much feed left up there. So we now know, well, that's where the next fence is going to go, and we're going to make them go up in that paddock, and we'll use that. So that's just been hugely beneficial from that side of it. With our stocking densities, it's a really tough thing. It sounds really easy, put your cattle together and rotate them and away you go. But when you're trying to deal with your own cattle, adjustment cattle, we've got breeders, we've got traders, it's not that easy all the time just to put them all together. So we're still working on that, and I think we're probably closest now than we've ever been in terms of getting those rest periods in. But the stocking density is crucial. We found that trying to get that mob size up so you can put them in there, really give that feed a good eat, and then smash down the rest that's left over, and then get them out and have a good long rest.
We're getting closer. What are we, probably at a 25 hectare paddock size average, I suppose, and we're running a 500-600 livestock unit in a mob. And we slow our rotations right down when our feed's maturing this time of year, but when we're growing in a growth phase, we're probably moving every 4 to 6 days.
It's really exciting to see the change in the pasture, just the makeup of all the different types over the time we've been doing it. And as we've increased the density, that's made a huge difference.
Well, what's really encouraging with our carrying capacity, I guess, is that we've had 3 of the worst years in living memory on the coast here. We're an 1100 mil average, and here we are again now with a 350 millimetre growing season. But the fact that we've probably still been able to carry over half, 2/3, 3/4 of our stock numbers through these dry periods, and then also see the health of the country increase, sort of gives you a bit of hope that what we're doing is right. I suppose that the immediate future is pretty exciting. We've signed up to a soil carbon agreement under the Land Restoration Fund, the Queensland Government's fund. Whilst soil carbon credits will be nice if we can increase our organic matter and our organic carbon, it's not really why we did it. It's what it's going to do for us is really focus us hard on increasing our soil carbon. I mean, soil carbon is probably the one metric that can't be disputed in terms of productivity, ecological outcomes. They all go hand in hand with increased organic matter in your soil and thus carbon. So
I guess it's something we're focusing on now too, because the cattle prices are so high. You know, we've destocked again early this growing season because it didn't eventuate. So how do you get back in again when you don't have a lot of capital behind you? And so I guess then you focus on what you can do. And so, you know, the pasture renovation is something that we can still keep going on, and maybe we use other people's cattle to then finish it off.
The exciting thing for us is that I find it interesting that sometimes profitability, productivity there's a perception that it's at odds with ecological outcomes, biodiversity, and we don't see that. Like, maybe that's the case sometimes, but we run a pretty hard bar over any decision we make, and it's got to stack up. Profitability is first and foremost. If we're not making money, we're not here to do it. But the ecological outcomes, the biodiversity increases, there's so many places where that stuff goes hand in hand, and it's really quite simple.
So I guess some of the key learnings we've probably come across on the way is don't be scared to ask people for help. There's so much help in this industry if you ask for it, and if you're willing to. Adam's always ringing people and hassling them and asking them questions, and people are more than willing to give a hand. The
other thing for us too, and we're still getting better at it, we've always got room for improvement, is making a decision when you need to make it, not dithering around and saying, well, you know, the seasons didn't quite eventuate and we might be running out of grass, but maybe we'll get some rain in a month. And we've made some hard decisions that are really, you know, trucking out replacement cattle when it really hits you in the guts. And maybe that wasn't the right decision with the benefit of hindsight, but any decision you make at that point in time is the correct one to be making, but it's a matter of being disciplined and making it.
We actually see the dung beetles as one of the key ingredients to a sustainable or regenerative farming system. Yeah, my name's Mick Alexander. My wife Nola and the two boys, we run an operation of around about 1,400 hectares in the Fitzroy Basin. We run anywhere from sort of 500 to 900 LSUs, or animals, annually. And we also background our cattle back into the community. So we process, and we've got a paddock to plate operation. Yeah, we actually began in about 2013 when my wife's dad, Trev Jones, passed away. He started a full reticulated watering system, so we pump out of the river, out of the Fitzroy, up to a hill, and then we gravity feed around every paddock. And he started that whole program off and then started breaking paddocks up. We just intensified that in the last 7 or 8 years. So what we've got now is we've gone from 11 paddocks to 80, and what we find is that any one paddock would only be being grazed for maybe a week to 2 weeks a year. The rest of the time it's resting. So that basically means that we've got this massive recovery period. We've got paddocks now that haven't had an animal in them for over 300 days. We operate 3 mobs generally, so we'll have a cow mob, or a breeder mob, sometimes a heifer mob, so maiden heifer, and then we'll have everything else, so young cattle, older cattle together. And the management is really simple because we've basically broken up the paddocks with electric fencing, and that fencing is fairly cheap to put in place. And when we find the paddocks are the right size and the right shape, we'll go back eventually and we'll replace those electric fences with permanents. Trevor's comment back in 2002-03 when we first started development, he said, something's wrong, Mick, it's just not working. We used to be able to run a lot more cattle for a lot more length of time, and he said the grass used to be that high you'd have to sit in a saddle to see over it, and now it's down to maybe a foot or maybe 2 foot high at the very best. So we started soil testing at that stage to find out the key indicators of low production. We found out that we've got simple things like a really out of whack calcium magnesium ratio. We apply lime on certain paddocks and all of a sudden we double the volume of feed. We've got low carbon levels, so what can we do about carbon? Well, we've got to get more plants growing, cycling more carbon back in. There was next to no legumes on the place 20 years ago. They'd all died out. And now we've actually got legumes in fact we've had hundreds of acres of just solid legumes last year, and native legumes. Phasey bean coming back that's never been seen for not my lifetime anyhow. There was very little dung beetle activity. There was a lot of hard pads everywhere you went. There was just hard pads not being buried on the ground. So in 2005 or 6, I think it was, we changed over to Attack and some of the backliner drenches from dips. And then in 2013 we made the big jump and we stopped drenching altogether. And from that point forward, our dung beetle population has just gone from just ticking along for a few months a year to just skyrocketed, and now we have beetle populations all year round. We actually see the dung beetles as one of the key ingredients to a sustainable or regenerative farming system. If we have that dung being buried so consistently, we're actually regenerating. Yeah, we've got cows and we've got grass and we've got this whole cycle working, but if we don't have carbon being sequestered back into the soil, we don't have a grazing system. It's the drought mitigation that we needed that we didn't know about. So if we can actually get carbon back in our soils, we can withstand droughts that anything that we went through in the last 2 years, we'll still be going productively. When you hear the story that you have to grow more volumes of grass, well, you don't grow more volumes, you just have to have healthier plants that can pump more down. So we actually think of every time we graze a paddock, we're actually pumping carbon. That's the story of sustainability and regenerative farming. It's about getting the plant actively growing and pumping and cycling. Well, on production side, we're able to run consistently 700 or 800 head of cattle. Our actual numbers have come up consistently. Back in 2003, for the first time in history, every weaner was sent away on agistment. We just wouldn't even consider that today. And the country was bare. We had a worse drought in just 2019, and we didn't have a single bare paddock on the place. We destocked early and we kept our numbers to a point where we can rebuild fast. If you go back to 2000, 2005, in that era, it was taking 4 and 5 years to finish a steer on this country. We have some nutritional issues here, and we're actually balancing that a lot with the supplements. But in that era there was no supplementation used, and there was absolutely no knowledge of that we need to have grass consistently, solid ground cover. Today we're actually able to finish those same animals in 2 years, not 5, and we're able to now have good marbling levels. We're able to have an actual dressed weight of 62% dressing percentage, and we're having 560, 580 kilo animals dress at 300 kilos plus. We've just jumped a hurdle to work out we can do it, and we can actually make this into a highly productive operation. We know that the community is asking us for credentials. If we've actually got all of the tools to say that we're doing as good as we can, and we're actually leading in industry, then we'll have the ability to stay there. I would actually sit down first of all and find as much information as you can out from local people who are actually innovating, because there's nothing like finding local people to talk to because they're in your own area. Farmers right now are the new commodity of the future, and we need to all work together to actually make sure that the groups that are out there, the industry groups, actually know that we're actually able to achieve the goals.
Part of our family business strategy is to ensure that we have a sustainable farming operation, and that means that we have to look after our environment, our cattle and our people. Melanie Leather, Barfield Station. We've got a finishing operation here at Barfield. We have 3 properties spread over 17,500 hectares, running about 4,500 head of cattle at the moment. When we think of looking after our cattle, the important thing is, making sure that we've got sufficient supply of good quality feed, adequate supplies of good quality clean water as well. So that's really about matching your stocking rate with your carrying capacity. And so we do things like grass budgeting, so we're constantly measuring our grasses, SIBO mapping to look at our biodiversity and land cover. Another thing is, of course, the introduction of leguminosas and other legumes to ensure that cattle have a good supply of highly nutritious feed at all times. Animal welfare is really important to us, and it's not just about, that fact that we really care for animals and we want to ensure that they have the best life possible, but good animal welfare will also equate to better productivity and profitability for us as a business as well. Making sure that they've got adequate supply of feed and water, low stress stock handling, the use of pain relief when we're doing aversive practices, making sure that everyone's trained and competent in animal husbandry and handling of cattle. With changing technology and new innovations, I think we have to be able to step up and utilise those as they become available to us. And I suppose a good example of that is the use of pain relief. For many years there wasn't a product available to us, whereas now we have products that are readily available. I think when things like that come on the market, it's important that we uptake that. A really important part of your herd management is the genetics of that. Certainly when we're purchasing bulls, all of our bulls must have EBVs, so estimated breeding values. We have certain traits that we're looking for. Things like the pole gene, the 200, 400, 600 day growth rates are important to us, days to calving. We have to be very mindful of which market the cattle are going into. So for instance, the EU grasslands cattle have to be very careful that there's no use of hormones. They're natural grass-fed animals. Never in their lifetime have they been fed grain products or antibiotics. The markets will overlap a little bit, so it was a very easy progression for us to go into organic or the Global Animal Partnership. Because of the way that we operate, we have to think of things according to the market, the age at branding, the age at weaning, all of those types of things. Being part of these markets, we have annual audits, particularly with Organic, Global Animal Partnership and Australian Certified Humane is a third-party independent annual audit. So we have to ensure that we've got the records to back up the claims that we're making. We have to be able to show the records of what we've done with husbandry procedures and basically the claims that we make to how that they're raised. The other great thing that we've found since we've moved into these markets is our cost of production has dropped, so we have very little input, which means that's more dollars in our pocket. But when we start to see environmental benefits, we know that we're getting productivity gains and making more money at the end of the day. But we're also improving our environmental footprint, so we know that our ground cover's improved or the biodiversity of species is improving. And I mean, they're things that we don't just say are happening, we do measure them. We have assessments on the ground and we keep a record of changes as we go along. Our business has decided to be in line with the red meat carbon neutral by 2030. That's the journey we're on at the moment, is how are we going to place our business to get to that point. So we've started a few things. We've got involved with a project called Method to Market where we're doing some on-farm benchmarking. So we've done soil sampling, we've looked at cattle numbers, we've looked at our inputs such as diesel fuel, fertilisers, which we don't use. We've got a number of properties that we're running quite a lot of solar. One of our properties is entirely 100% solar run. We've got about 29 solar water pumps across our 3 properties. Part of our business strategy is to have 10,000 acres under Lakina. The woody growth of the Lakina sequesters carbon. We've certainly noticed that it is definitely getting hotter and drier, and we're getting more of those extreme weather events. So how are we going to manage for that? Lakina has definitely been something that's helped us with that because it is fairly drought tolerant. And we know that we're going to have a reasonably high protein feed source even when it's quite dry. Water's another really big important thing, and it's really about supply, and I think we're not getting the same runoff water into our dams, so groundwater's fairly critical. Another really important aspect of becoming carbon neutral is looking at our herd structures, the size and shape of the animals. The big framed heavy bullocks that you kept for 4 and 6 year old have sort of gone. We're looking for something that's smaller, it's going to get the fat on quicker, better yielding animal. Really important when we're looking at our EBVs to pick out those traits in the EBV that are going to give us that result. Part of our family's business strategy is continuous education, and it's a really important aspect of how we take our business forward. So we look to a lot of different people to collaborate with when we're doing our training. We find that MLA is really important to us as a service provider, and certainly the research and development that happens there and the tools and technology that they can give us to help improve our business is invaluable to us. We like to collaborate with our local DAF, so Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry, and also our local catchment groups, which here is the Fitzroy Basin Association, and our other two properties, it's the Burnett Mary Regional Group. So we find that working with these teams of people really assists us to try and do the best job we can, but they're also giving us that, new technology and information as it comes out.
As a stud breeder, it was really important to us to stop mulesing first, so our clients who want to stop mulesing can then know that the bloodline that they're buying can cope with being non-mulesed. And now we're finding that non-muled sheep are being actively sought after, ewes and rams and wethers, particularly by people who've got quality assurance schemes. We've just had our ram sale and the average price is at the top end for merino sales in Western Australia. I'm Lindley Anderson. I'm a sheep and grain farmer from Cogen up in Western Australia. We learned a long time ago that you can't tell from looking at a ram what its lambs are going to be like, how fast they're going to grow, how much wool they're going to cut, what's their staple strength going to be, how worm resistant they are. With genetic breeding values, you can predict how an animal is going to breed and what its progeny are going to be like. And this is even more important for the traits that aren't highly heritable, like worm resistance and DAGs. My grandfather was quite a pioneer in his day with objective measurement back in the 1960s. And as more technology came along, I suppose we jumped on board with that for pregnancy scanning, eye muscle scanning. The worm egg counts, we started breeding for worm resistance in 2002, 2003, because the Department of Ag had shown that it was possible to breed a sheep that was entirely resistant to intestinal parasites. We've always aimed to breed an animal that's robust and productive and low maintenance. Plain-bodied sheep are easy care sheep. They're less likely to have problems with fly strike and wool faults, less likely to have DAGs. So it was a natural progression to just breed sheep that were plainer. But along the way we had to make sure we weren't compromising on any production traits at the same time. That's where genetic breeding values have really helped us progress. You can look at a ram and how it's going to breed and know what its progeny going to be like, and then make sure you're not compromising on any traits that are important to you. We've been using breeding values for a very long time now. We know they work, we've seen the proof. In particular, they help you make progress in the traits that are harder to measure, like worm resistance, DAGs, and even eating quality. It's taken quite a few years to get to the level of worm resistance that we have now, but it's been quite a few years since we've been able to stop drenching. We now only drench the weaners, and the weaners only because we can't tell at that age who might need a drench and who doesn't. The benefits, obviously, big saving of time and labour, better for the animals. And we've also found that we've got more dung beetles now and all year round. Dung beetles are amazing little environmental activists. They eat dung and they bury it in the soil. So they're adding nutrients into the soil, they aerate it. It's good for the soil, it's good for pasture growth. And they're reducing the dung on the surface so there's less breeding opportunities for flies. The non-wetting gravels, the water tends to shed off them rather than infiltrate, and so there's not that soil moisture there available for plants to grow and get their roots down. What we found is one of the ways that is working to manage that is to keep our ground cover, particularly on these non-wetting gravels. Keep the pasture there even when it's dried off so that it catches the rain and holds it in that spot, and it can infiltrate through the existing root channels. And with our crops, we cut the straw and chop it up and spread it back over. That also creates some mulch and organic matter which helps break down the non-wetting aspect of the soil. My father would have planted about 200,000 trees to try and reduce the salinity, and since then we've probably planted a couple of 100,000 more. We found that perennial pastures and fodder shrubs do a better job of reducing the salinity. We don't have all the answers yet on how to completely alleviate it. What we aim to do is have every paddock set up with good shade and shelter for the sheep, and to have the best lambing outcome for newborn lambs. We rotationally graze all the sheep because it gives the plants a chance to recover in between grazings and helps us manage the pastures better. And rotational grazing helps the plants keep their healthy root systems, using up rain as it falls, and it just leads to healthier soils with root mass in the soil, a bit of aeration, and it prevents that runoff down onto the valley floors, which is contributing to salinity. The changes that we've put in place over the last 20 years with grazing management and breeding have meant that there's a lot less labour input required with our sheep management, but we've also been able to increase the stocking rate, and lambing percentage has increased about 40% in 20 years. We're seeing the benefits from sheep that are just doing better because we've set up the environment for them to do better. All these changes that we've made over the years have made us a lot more productive and more profitable. We've got higher lamb survival, higher lambing percentage, more wool cut, able to turn off lambs much faster because they grow faster. I think we have a healthy environment on the farm for the animals and the people who live and work here too, and it's a win-win all round.
I'm pretty passionate about the environment and about the environment that I'm responsible for here on our farm, but I'm also very passionate about the environment right across the world. And I think the beef industry is starting to take responsibility for the emissions that we're making, and I think that's really important. We have to be brave in that space, and the beef industry is being really brave in that space. Hi, my name's John Wright. I'm a beef producer from Central West New South Wales. We're in a little town called Woodstock. We've got about 3,500 acres, 500 breeding cows. We're a seed stock operation as well as a commercial producer. I think there's about 4 major areas as a beef producer that I can contribute to reducing our emissions to help fix the problem of climate change. They're pretty simple. It's in the genetics of our animals, it's how we manage our properties day to day. It's all about how we can sequester carbon. We can take carbon out of the atmosphere and hold it in our soil for a long period of time. And then there's different things as far as feed additives that we might be able to give to our animals to reduce their emissions. The best way to describe feed efficiency, I think, is, we're trying to breed animals that produce as much beef as possible for as little feed as possible. One thing we do know is the amount of methane an animal produces, or a cow produces, is directly related to how much they eat. So if we can reduce the amount they're eating to produce the same product, we're going to have a more sustainable product and a product that we can be proud of. We didn't just choose the most efficient animals. They had to be the most efficient animals that also grew and also marbled and also showed all the fertility factors that we needed, and muscularity traits that we know are the ones that make commercial producers more profitable. And that was always our core principle of using those traits in our selection index that make commercial producers more profitable, because that's our job. We've been doing this feed conversion testing for 23 years on this line of cattle now. Most of the trial work that we've done is showing us, I think we've shifted feed efficiency in that area about 15 to 20%. So our herd is now eating 15 to 20% less than the average herd around. We've got so much evidence backing up what we've done now, which is really exciting, and it was logical. That's what the original research said, that if you identify those animals that are good converters and breed from them, you'll improve efficiency over time. From the beginning, we started on just a commercial trait that was about making more money for commercial producers, and it still does. Nothing's changed over the last 25 years. What's evolved is the relationship between feed intake and methane production, and that's a really interesting part. One thing that we have shown over the last sort of 24 or 25 years, we've been a bit of an experiment in ourselves. And after 25 years, I think we'd see the problems that could come from selecting for feed efficiency in our herd. So if there was implications which many people have been concerned about in the industry in relation to feed efficiency, we're not seeing any of them. We're maintaining industry standards for fertility and growth and all those important traits. So, one of the most exciting things is we have an example of, what you can do if selecting for feed efficiency. Our job was to create animals that were more efficient. The part that those animals that are requiring less feed to do the same job, they hit the wall at a later stage. So when challenged, whether it be in drought or just in a bit drier seasons, the animals that require less feed will hit the wall as far as fertility or their ability to fatten or their ability to yield. They will hit that wall later than other animals, and that's got to be of a real benefit. The other part is in the management of our cattle on the place. Having done the work in the area of feed efficiency, I respect the input, the feed, so I've learnt to manage my cattle in a way of not letting them get too fat. Utilise management strategies that reduce the intakes of my cattle, because the amount of methane a cow produces is directly related to how much she eats. The tools that we're using in our program basically start at birth. We're weighing every calf. There's 500 calves being born a year. Every single one of those is weighed. They're weighed at weaning time, yearling age. All our bulls, we're doing the efficiency testing on. At the end of the efficiency test, we're doing the eye muscle area, fat and marbling scans, weighing every cow as she weans a calf. We've taken DNA samples on every single bull that we've tested over the last 23 years. We're now starting to get a lot of that DNA processed to get a better indication of the genetic ability of our bulls for our consumers. As far as our business is concerned and the part that we play in looking after the piece of land and the environment that we operate in, genetics is a small part of it. We've got 3,500 acres here, and we look at that land as we don't own it. We've just paid that money to care for it for a period, and that brings responsibility. So in that space, we've tried to do that in the most ecologically sound way. So we respect nature and respect what nature can do over time. So that's when we jumped off the high input type production system and reduced input costs. We're encouraging diversity in our pastures. We're capturing carbon in our soil because the value of that is an enormous part. Respecting ground cover and keeping ground cover on our property, and then using rotational grazing to stimulate the system and really build that system to become more profitable, to utilise more of our rainfall and have a more sustainable system, which makes me happier and more proud of the business that I run. After 23 years of breeding this line of cattle, some of the greatest learnings I've had is the ability to persist and keep going will be rewarded in time. Remember how passionate you are, hold on to that passion and the reasons that you started. Things won't always go the way that you think they're going to go, and the world and the industry changes, and you have to be able to either stick with what you're doing or be brave enough to change with those things. So wisely or unwisely, we've stuck with what we're doing, but we're now in a position where, we're really excited about the type of cattle that we're breeding, that we can offer to the industry to help tell a story that's positive for our industry. Breeding cattle and genetics is not the solution, it's just one of the many parts to it, and we've got a lot of exciting things in our industry that we can talk about and measure and extend to consumers to show them we're making a difference.
The millennial drought was a series of droughts from 2000 to 2010, 02, 03, 06 and 09. There was no years in that time frame we had above average rainfall, it was always below average. And it was pretty hard hitting in this area. The ecological systems were breaking down. You could see the damage that was occurring. We knew we had to do some significant changes with our operation. Basically, the retention of trees or greater forestry was one of them. And that led us into the carbon farming. That we viewed our trees differently. You allow those trees to grow and do their natural thing, which is to get quite high, get canopy. It gives you an income stream as well as animal welfare outcomes and profitability outcomes. James and Kylie Anderson, so we're on Culloden, 250 kilometres west of Bundaberg, 4,600 hectares here of open eucalypt woodland where we run a breeding operation. We also have satellite properties where we do our backgrounding and fattening. We started looking into carbon farming a long time ago, probably about 2011. It ended up signing in about 2017, so we've got two projects here. We've got one which is human-induced regeneration, where we're getting paid for regrowing native vegetation. And we've got an avoided clearing, which is we're getting paid to not clear certain vegetation that has reached a threshold. When we started in the back end of that millennial drought, we were looking for answers and for a lot of different parts of our businesses at the same time, from the genetics of the cattle to the management of the cattle to the management of the landscape. These are all sort of things we were considering. The first thing we started is we started getting going to a lot more field days and doing the MLA Edge Network programs, working closely with DPI then about feeding regimes, how to supplement feed best. We got a lot of information, and the hard part was taking that information, what you knew, that you learned at the field days, bringing it back and unpacking it and actually implementing it, but in a way that was conducive to your business and what your management at the time. So you can't go from one extreme to the other overnight. It does take time. So it took us 20 years to implement all those changes that we learnt. We shortened our calving period, so we went from essentially a 5-month join down to a 3-month join. We started moving the cattle. We changed the genetic makeup of our cows. We actually shrunk our cow size using EBVs, which was a key thing. So we had a smaller cow to maintain when it does get dry. And through that process, we've managed to continually to improve our weaner weights over time. Our conception rates are improving over time. Our total tonnes per hectare on the property in dry matter is increasing over time. And all these things also make it easy to lead into other things like carbon farming. It led us into matching cattle to feed, so making sure getting to the end of your wet season going, righto, this is how many cattle we have going forward, this is what our feed requirements is, this is how much feed we have, and actually getting a plan in place and then implementing the plan. If you actually take that next step to say, no, we will be proactive here and reduce numbers where we need to, well then obviously you come out the other side in such a better position. Cattle are simply a representation of the healthier landscape. So if you want healthy cattle, you've got to have a very healthy landscape. So if your landscape is pushed and you're pushing the boundaries on the health of that landscape, it reflects quite quickly in those cattle. It's a pretty simple equation that if you've got a healthy, productive system that you're not running down and you're putting more back into than what you're taking out, is that your cattle follow suit. You sort of got to reverse the equation and look at your landscape first and your cattle second, and it makes it a lot easier. But you need those management actions around those cattle to be able to start that process. When we started looking into carbon farming, we weren't just looking at carbon farming, we were also looking at the forestry aspect because there is a simple relationship there. Ultimately you are growing trees, so those trees have a commercial value, and then linking that back to the cattle production and making sure we weren't basically dropping our cattle production just to make money somewhere else. So that was a bit of a process to align the management activities and get the right metrics. So were we measuring the right things to know that when we went down this road, we weren't going to lose production in some other part of our business. Once we identified that and we could move forward, it was a pretty simple process in saying we could backdate data and say, look, well, effectively we've been doing this anyway. We haven't seen any massive production drops or anything. Everything was going along right. Everything was trending up. So it gave us the confidence to go into those processes knowing that we were on the right track. The most important tools that we found were the real simple ones. Go online, look at long paddock report and print out how much feed you've got. In that report is the carrying capacity. In that report is how much feed you got relative to the areas benchmarked around you. Once you can draw the correlation between those two indicators, well then you've got a pathway out of that pretty quickly. And then being able to do things like we were involved in the cash cow program, which was a very large benchmarking operation. It gave us really critical insights on how to benchmark effectively, But even now, we still reference that document. So every year I reference that document in saying how we are benchmarked against that study. Once you've sort of got those critical pieces of data and you know what the benchmark is, well, then you can start developing your plan to go forward. When you're looking at the carbon data, it's a bit different. It's a new market, it's an emerging market. It's actually very hard to forecast. As opposed to the forestry one, which is quite an established market, it's actually a simpler equation to work out in your forestry where it's going to go forward. You've got time to develop that plan over time. The beef is very immediate. You do this, that happens, and the carbon is somewhere in between. Managing these carbon and forestry projects along with your beef going forward is a bit of a challenge in that the perception is that you're locking it up, but the reality is there's more management now than what there used to be in our landscapes. It's more important that we are completely on top of our weeds, we're completely on top of our feral animals. There's actually more management now in these areas than there probably ever has been, and that's a direct result because to get the most out of those projects, they need to be managed. It's quite simple. The more you manage them, the better they perform. We used to have a very staggered profit line. Our profit would be up, it would be down, it would jump around, along with our numbers. You know, some years you'd have a good year, some years you'd have a bad year, and it would jump around. It made budgeting difficult. These days it's much more consistent. You know, we consistently run our business at a pretty even line. It's not jumping all over the place with big profits and big losses. It makes it much simpler to budget, and if you can budget, well, then you can control your cash flow, and it also gives you more money in the bank to execute on opportunities when they arise. We sell cattle on our terms now, not when we need cash. It's a different way of managing your business. You're much more in front of the game than we used to be.
Challenges that have been faced by the business in the past have been inconsistency in rainfall. That's been forever, and I think trying to maintain production through those tighter climatic times, that's a challenge that we're getting better at addressing. I'm David Gregg, live at Tottenham in central New South Wales, and we run a mixed farm, winter cropping and merino sheep. You know, probably the most notable time we've seen a difference was coming out of the drought in early 2020. Our sheep were away on agistment and it began to rain, and our country began to respond instantly to the rain that year, and we brought our sheep back off agistment as the grass was growing, and it beat them in most paddocks. We went away from set stocking probably over a decade now, which allows us to rotate around our native country and probably better utilise the feeds that's there. We've introduced new, more robust merino genetics into our business. You know, we then learn a bit management-wise to really drive our production in what's otherwise a reasonably marginal mixed farming area. We went chasing genetics to prevent fly strike. That was the catalyst. You know, so we looked around and came across the plain skin merino type purely for that fly strike factor. Mulesing was more of a sideline to begin with. Our management then was the thing that was probably needed the work. I was involved in a lifetime ewe management group in our area. That really put our focus on looking after the animal, keeping them in a desired condition score throughout the year to allow them to, I guess, express their genetic potential. We shear 6 weeks prior to joining. 6 weeks is ample time to get these ewes on a rising plane of nutrition, percentage of them condition scored at shearing, and then we set in place a program to get them into the condition score we want for joining. And then we also shear just before we lamb, and we'll condition score again, and then we'll prioritise our lambing paddocks to those ewes that need the best pasture. Outside the lambing period, we rotate our sheep through the grazing paddocks to better rest the grasses, and utilise the fresher feed through that process. It certainly seems to build the ground cover that we've got. We're lucky enough with rotating sheep through pastures. I don't think we've drenched for 10 years on this place. That takes a lot of the heavy lifting out of the sheep enterprise. It's been small steps since we did that lifetime ewe management course. We're now up to scanning merino ewes at 180% and marking in excess of 140% of lambs to ewes joined. Our lamb survival's up in the 80s. In the twinners, we've run our first triplet lambing this year, which has been quite successful. I'm the person that does the sheep work, so I've got to make it manageable for one person to do. Plainer styled merinos require less management. They're not as susceptible to fly waves, which is a major labour issue. Look, and they're very robust. They respond better to changes in feed. So once lambs have been weaned off ewes, we see an instant response just by moving those ewes into a fresh paddock. We've been selecting for animals that are positive for fat and muscle on breeding values. They're also very strong for growth, and they're also long and in staple length. That all works in with the 6-month shearing. Those strong carcass figures make a very resilient animal. I call them a bulletproof sheep. Our losses out of the system are so low now. We can now forward budget lambing percentages, forward budget lamb turn-off years in advance because the results we're getting are so consistent. Our main enterprise is selling ewes, whether they be first cross ewes to the fat lamb producer or merino ewes that go on to someone either wanting to breed plain body merinos or to produce a first cross ewe themselves. The benefits to us is that we've got twice as many of them to sell off the same amount of acres. The doubling of lambing percentages in 8 to 10 years. Lamb survival is something that it's integral to our business. We're very hands-off, so I don't do lambing rounds every morning through lambing. In fact, this year I didn't drive into a lambing paddock for the 5 weeks of lambing. We keep no passengers in the program, so every dry ewe gets sold. Lamb survival rates in the singles of 98.5% this year. Our twinning survival in the low 80%. The added value of having the non-mules ewes in our system is that we've got wool that's open to a lot more markets. For the first time in my lifetime, I've got people calling me inquiring about purchasing our surplus sheep, or they can see the benefit of those animals as well. The biggest learning is to match the condition score of your ewes to the timing of their reproductive cycle. So knowing what condition score your ewes need to be in, or what level of nutrition you need to provide them with leading into joining, and then having them in the right condition score once they're scanned to ensure lamb survival. I always think you need to be the silliest person in the conversation. So find someone who's doing it better than you and talk to them. I think the top producers are happy to share. You've just got to get out there and ask.
It's fairly typical of farming that we've got to be flexible, and we've got to have a system moving forward that can take these anomalies that are thrown at us. I'm Audrey Bird, and I am part of the family business here at Windora Farms, Wickerpin, which is situated 250 k's southeast of Perth in the great state of Western Australia. The growing season isn't very long here. From May till October, that's our growing season. So we've really got to make sure that we have everything set up really well to capitalise on when that rain does come. Supplementary feeding was a major cost for us. Although it's not done very much in this area, we realised that we had to change our lambing because our ewes increases her energy requirement significantly after she lambs. and we weren't matching that with feed supply. By putting our lambing back a month from end of May to the end of June, we also realised that we would have to change our shearing, so we've changed our shearing to the end of March. And one good thing that has done is that meant that at lambing time, because the ewe hasn't got so much wool on, she will actually tend to seek out shelter. Just highlighting that you can't look at those management activities in isolation. It's got to be a whole of systems approach. We realised that wanting to protect the soil and increase our ground cover, that we also had to improve our pastures. And by being able to defer the sheep of those mixed species pastures, it's allowed them to actually grow and build up some biomass, lots of feed for them to go in and eat, and more importantly, a lot of quality feed. One of the things that we were really concerned about was having lightweight lambs going into summer. But what we have in fact found is that by having a better quality feed, we're actually getting better growth rates. So our lambs going into summer are the same weight as if we had lambed a month earlier. Now, instead of having not a lot of pasture feed, during winter and spring, we've got more than we know what to do with. Because we're not supplementary feeding during lambing, we're actually not disturbing the ewes as much. The ewe doesn't have to walk away to get water, doesn't have to walk away to get a feed, so we're really getting that better mothering ability. By putting the sheep into special areas prior to lambing, it's allowed us a more guaranteed feed system. You know, we don't have those bare paddocks with the ewes running all over, burning off energy, trying to get a feed. It's definitely made our livestock enterprise very resilient. Implementing best practice is a focus. When the pain relief option became available, I was really keen to explore those, and I could see the real benefits of those as far as simple things like the mothering up of lambs after they've come off the marking cradle back to the ewes, and if you can minimise that stress, it's the right thing to be doing. 3 years ago, I had the opportunity to trial out the Numbnuts product. I was actually quite amazed at how good it was, especially on the male lambs. The behavioural observations after they came off the cradle, there was significant difference. Along with that, I also became aware of the buccal Gesic, which is an oral gel. The Numbnuts is a short-term pain relief, whereas the busulgesic is more of a longer term, so it kicks in after the Numbnuts has finished. It allows the lamb to find its mum again after marking. Mothering up is really important to reduce that whole stress loading of the lamb at that young age. For the cost that's involved and doing the job properly, we certainly will be continuing to do it. We're part of a group that's actually having a look at a non-mulesed flock. By being part of this group, it's given me confidence that it's perhaps not as scary as it could have been. The big thing that you've got to look at is that plain-bodied merino with no wrinkles. One of the best courses that I've done have to be the Lifetime Ewe Management course. It gives you good management techniques and targets. One thing that the course really stresses is the importance of having your ewe in that score 3 condition score. The flow-on effects from that as far as increased wool growth, but also increased fertility, a more resilient ewe that's going to handle the ups and the downs better. What I've learnt in the last 10 years is to be aware of what changes are out there to better our farming system and our business. It's just been my farming life journey in general is be open, be accepting and listen to other people whose system might be or technique might be a little bit different but might work in your area to improve yourself.
Taking away adverse pain from an animal for us is super important. That's my philosophy, I suppose, that we actually need to be, as an industry, ahead of the game. And it's such a wonderful thing that the industry is taking on board, is the introduction of human-grade pain relief for animals. It's really good, and we strongly encourage that, and all farmers out there to take it on board. Tim Leeming, I farm with my wife Georgie and 2 daughters. The property that we run is Paradoo Prime. We farm a self-replacing prime lamb enterprise in southwest Victoria, northwest of Hamilton. 25 years ago, when I started to manage my own flock and my own land, I just didn't really agree with mulesing, so we actually changed our genetics at that time. Just with one extra cross and a flatter, plainer bodied sheep, we were able to cease mulesing. Running a red meat business or a prime lamb businesses are in reducing wastage and making sure that your animals are fit and healthy is really paramount to your production system. So the better your animals are performing and the better that they can reach their optimum potential genetically, and the importance of economic viability of our business, it goes hand in hand. So if you look after your livestock and make sure that they're not suffering from pain, they're fit and healthy, that you're feeding them the optimum amount of nutrition at the right times of the year, then it's a win-win situation. You know, with recently in the last 5 years, we've used products such as numb nuts, which we were just, so keen to use. That's why we sort of put up our hand early in the piece as a property to trial that product. We've actually just trialled a combination of numb nuts and Medicam, which we think is probably the gold standard really for pain relief in sheep. We know that we can, if we survive 6 or 7 lambs in 1,000 because we use human grade pain relief, and those 6 or 7 lambs actually survive the process and don't endure that pain, we've actually paid for the product. For us to have fitter, healthier animals and the ease of which we can get those ewes and lambs back to the paddock after they've had their animal health treatments, then that's a good thing. What we're doing is we've looked at our landscape, we know our landscape and our environment. There's areas on our farm that are particularly insulated or offer sanctuary for the ewes and lambs at that really important and stressful time, which is when they reproduce. So we've developed a system called precision lambing, which is short joinings and short lambings where we can actually maximise the use of the best environment on our farm. We're really proud of the success of that, and a lot of farmers in our area and RAM clients and that sort of thing have implemented it, and no one's turning back. It's just working really well. And it doesn't matter what sort of environment you've got. You've always got the good, the bad and the average areas on your farm, and it's just getting farmers to understand, maybe I can put a system in place where I can maximise the use of the good parts of the farm. Mob size, we recognise the benefits of reducing mob size for multiple bearing ewes. Our twin bearing ewes lamb in mobs of less than 50 and have been doing that for over 6 years. Our triplet bearing ewes this year lambed in mob sizes of 14. So we do that by using temporary electric fencing in some of those nice protected valleys. We even use some of the riparian zones just for a couple of weeks of the year where we've got nicely fenced off waterways that are re-vegged for really good lamb survival outcomes. It might sound a complicated system, but it's important that we have the right amount of grass, we have the right environment, we have the right mob size, we have the right privacy, and we have the right condition score of the ewes. Often to attain all that, you need to have some core disciplines, and monitoring the condition score of your ewes at key times during the year is just integral to that, to make sure that your nutrition that you're feeding that ewe is adequate. Matching the feed to the animal demand all through the year is what it's all about. In regards to managing your sheep to avoid events such as fly waves, it's really your timing of operation. So it's all about understanding your environment, probably reading the tea leaves as far as the weather. For instance, we'll put our big mobs of wean ewes that are quite susceptible to body strike because they've got a lot of wool on them in the spring, because we shear in late December, January. So being able to get them out of those sort of humid, moist, lush environments we might be in the gullies, and put them on tops of hills where they can get a bit of wind under them and dry them out, and that certainly avoids a lot of body strike and things like that. This year we've got crutching trailers that come in and do our crutching in one foul swoop. We might be
in the vicinity of 6,000 to 7,000 sheep getting crutched in a day. The infrastructure that we've built, we can handle that. So that's a hell of a lot of sheep to go through a set of yards and be crutched and taken back to their paddock in one day, but we can do it. You can't manage a grazing operation without addressing those basic principles of fencing to your land type and class. So we've got extremely small paddock sizes on this property where we are at the moment. Our average paddock size is less than 7 hectares. Now the reason for that is we're a gently undulating landscape that's cut up with waterways and creeks and valleys and tablelands and things like that. So it's very old school, but the old whole farm planning course that I did back in my early 20s, we still refer back to those basic principles. Lots of reticulated water, small paddocks, big mob grazing at different times of the year to manage your weeds, manage your pasture growth, your leaf area. They're all really paramount to running a successful grazing operation. Programs like lifetime ewe management, for instance, it's been such a positive effect on the sheep industry. The introduction of pain relief in a number of forms is a real step forward. Doing those short courses in nutrition and being able to understand how to condition score and monitor the health of your flock is really important. Understanding the timing of operations, even the timing of lambing in relation to when you're growing your grass. There's simple things that can change that cost very little money, but can have some massive impacts on your profitability as a business.
Firstly, you need to understand what are the profit drivers in your business. Once you understand that, you need to collect the data which links to those traits. I'm Darren Hamblin. My wife Melanie and I have been living here for 20 years. We breed Wagyu. We have normally around about 6,000 head. I found that they had the larger difference of low to high value animals, and I wanted to reach the high end. And by putting a lot of work into those animals, genetically and genomically, I could reach the top end of that, and the money is there to return that investment. The reason we went to Wagyu is because we had trouble with fertility. It really kicks that away from the first cross. When you get there, you start to realise the real traits that people chase Wagyu for as the meat eating quality, which is initially, and still is now I guess, the value of the carcass is driven by the carcass weight and the marble score. Now to give you an idea, we can have a swing in value of $2,000 to $3,000 for the same animal that's cost you the same to breed and feed. So you can appreciate why we want to aim for the top end of that. Where we're heading for now in the future is more of the detail in the marble, so the fineness and distribution, because even though now we're not paid on that, I know we will be, and I don't want to be 15 years behind that trait. So the data that we use to make those decisions on breeding our animals firstly started out just looking at the size and the average of that size offspring, the average of their trait. So the average marble score or carcass weight of all of his offspring, link it back to the sire, and then you can rank your sires. Now that's quite an accurate way of doing it, which served us for 20 years. We do the same for the cows because we record the dam of each carcass. So the traits we select for, initially we start with fertility. When we finish AIing our cows, 35 days later we ultrasound scan, preg test them, and we keep the fertile ones. The next in line I would say would be the carcass traits. Now the issue with them is they take 4 to 5 years to get that information back, so it's a very slow feedback. The other traits that we have introduced of late are the pole trait. Now that's been done in conjunction with 2 other Wagyu herds. So now we've started on a high base and we can move on throwing all our best genetics together, but keeping that pole gene. And the pole gene is not that hard to follow. What is hard is making sure you don't lose focus on the key traits. The first thing is to collect data, I guess, and so crush side we have to use software which is individual animal well, we use stock books and EID readers and scales all feeding into that. That's what most people think is data collection, but for us it's everything right down to going out in the paddock on your horse, catching a calf and writing down its mother, its date of birth, its sex. So everything we do is data collection. When we give chemicals, vaccinations, we record what we give to each animal, we record the batch numbers. It's for data collection so we can analyse that later on, but it's also traceability of everything we do. So if anyone ever asks me what chemicals or drugs one animal's had, I can show them. Whilst that served us well for 20 years, we got to the stage where we wanted to delve deeper into that, because we noticed that even with the same sire and dam, you get variability in your outcome. So we started to use the SNPs. Now SNPs are singular nucleotide polymorphisms, which is a much more accurate way of describing the genome of an animal. So we analysed the relationship between the most predictable traits connected to the SNPs. So now we know which ones they are and which ones are the most linked to any particular trait. And if we know the sire and we know the dam, we know the chances of the combination being the outcome we want. Everyone wants a predictor on their trait immediately, which can be done now using genomics. Bearing in mind, whatever predictor we use has to be linked back to some actually collected trait. So luckily for me, I've collected that for 25 years, and now I have the genotypes to link back to that data. So the beauty of having all this information allows me now to go back and rethink about what traits we need going forward. In reality, what we need is we need to produce good meat for consumers, but there are also other considerations that we can now focus on, and some of those are net feed intake of animals. There's a lot of concern around about how we are working with the environment. We've done a lot of work with net feed intake. Now what that means to me is we can produce a kilo of good meat with less grass than we have had in the past. Now with that information connected to genomics, we can also select on those traits. So for those people who want to make progresses with genomics, I believe their best way to do it is by using breed plan. It'll be the best indicator they can get because it's linked up to other people's animals by genomics. However, the best way for them to get a really good predictor is use that technology to its best extent, and that is put a lot of data in. There's no way around putting a lot of data in. You can use everyone else's data and think you're going to get by on the back of their information, but it's by no way as good as having your own data.
We see the future of red meat being premium products, that are underpinned by traceability. Also, we see the carbon story being involved in brands. We also see, the sustainability through environment becoming part of the one picture. It'll be what you need to get on a retailer globally. And as a producer, we want to be on the front foot of it. My name's Tom Bull. We're coming from Kinross Station, based at Holbrook, where our business Lampro is run, sitting with his Rosie McKenna and Sophie Angus. We've come from a merino-based industry. Now we're very much meat sheep focused. Our whole basis of actually separating ourselves from the wool industry and having standalone meat sheep that are focused on producing meat with little focus on wool. The key traits we've selected improve productivity. Remembering we have two types of sheep, maternal and terminal breeds. The maternal is probably where most money's made, and we've seen significant improvements over time. Back 20 years ago, we couldn't join new lambs successfully. This year, we've scanned 160% in our yearling ewes, which is a huge productivity gain over 2 decades.
I think one of the key drivers in the productivity here has been embracing technology as it evolves, embracing genomics each year as well, now that it's becoming quite an important part of our business. Along with EIDs has definitely played a big part, and there's no way we'd be able to capture as much data as we do without EID tags.
One of the early things we did was actually did a lot of consumer data. So we actually did consumer sampling through University of New England, And we actually basically got consumers to eat meat and start ranking them. And what you could see, there was a huge difference between their overall liking of meat. So really we saw marbling of actually controlling the genetics, controlling the nutrition, and being able to offer consumers a higher level of experience through controlling those things. And that's really what our brands have done. Willow Bend in the States, Kinross Station in a number of countries. But it's a well-trodden road. Beef went down that path 20 to 30 years ago. Lamb doesn't have a high end, and that's where over a number of years we wanted to take lamb up that next level, and marbling was our vehicle to do that. As technologies move, genomic data allows us to capture that data at young ages, in essence without having to kill the animal. Therefore, a genomic test can all of a sudden improve the accuracy of a marbling result from 45 to nearly 60%. That literally started with 20 lambs a week, going to high-end butchers, growing that to go to restaurants, doing that in Australia, then rolling that out globally.
Every week we're going down and testing clients' lambs for IMF using a machine called the Soma, and we will look at exploring further technologies like the MEQ probe. We take that sample every week, every single carcass that comes across the table, and giving that feedback back to clients in the form of an average IMF for that consignment. And they're really excited about where their IMF's heading in their flock, and they want to know how they can improve. And then that also links back to their ASBV selection when it comes to choosing their rams.
The good thing about that data, it's not just genetic. It's highly influenced by how happy the lambs were, which encourages them to grow. If lambs haven't been in a good environment, we see that come through in the marbling. Marbling, we often see really well-grown lambs that have been in a really good environment will have the high marbling score. So many of the things we do from an animal selection point of view have a positive carbon benefit. Twinning, for example, is a huge driver. Having a ewe that emits for a year, if she produces 2 lambs, it is so much more efficient from the farmer from a financial basis, but more importantly, it's from a carbon point of view. We got one emitter producing twice as many lambs. And growth rate's another one. The quicker an animal hits its weight target, the less time it's going to be emitting for. When you look at the hardcore objective measurement of carbon, so many things we're doing now are already contributing in that already.
This year we actually started our carbon baselining program, looking at what we currently emit as a business, as a property, as a farm, and then letting the data that comes back from that influence management decisions going forward, so we can work towards our common goal of reaching carbon neutrality going into the future.
Grazing management for us, we're 80% deep-rooted perennials, a real carbon sink, but also, maintaining ground cover is king for us, particularly in those dry years. How do you manage ground cover? Bringing animals in, confining animals in hectares that they're still very comfortable, but they're not degrading the landscape when things get tight.
In terms of environmental verifications, we've gone with a program called Ecological Outcome Verification, which is connected to the Land to Market brand over in the States. The core of it really is looking at biodiversity, which is more than just looking at carbon. It's looking at the whole ecosystem and how we can support it, from the microbes and the bugs in the soil through to the plants, and then going on to native species. In the eye of the consumer over in the States, which is where our Willow Bend product goes to, it really is the gold standard. And playing in that premium market, that's where they want to spend their money. They want to know that the lamb that they're eating has come from a regeneratively verified farm. It allows us to tell our story with the data that they collect through that process.
When we start looking at our measures, being EOV and also the carbon benchmarking, the two have got to go together. You can become carbon efficient by planting our whole property to pine trees, but all of a sudden our ecosystems decline. And we've got to get that balance. By using the EOV, we're actually got a clear carbon focus on reduction, but we've also got a focus on maintaining the local ecosystem.
So they're looking at our soil health, looking at the microbes, carbon, water infiltration, the bugs that actually exist within the pasture, really looking at things from the ground up. So looking at pasture species and how we maintain wildlife corridors on the farm, so everything does act as a really cohesive and thriving ecosystem. The practices that we already had in place that were important was maintaining ground cover was a huge one, and ensuring the pasture species that we are encouraging are perennial, deep tap-rooted systems, and making sure stock are grazing to an appropriate level and then moving them on.
I think having trees is a really underestimated benefit for livestock. There's no doubt, on a cold, wet, windy day, lambs being able to get out in a tree plantation has certainly helped with lamb survival as well. From a profitability standpoint, I think perenniality is really important with the cost structures in ag. Sowing stuff each year, using huge amounts of chemical is really something of the past, where a lot of these pastures on this farm have been here for 30 plus years. And I think that's a really important part from an environmental standpoint for sequestering carbon, but it's also from a profitability point of view, they're costing us nothing. By underpinning through GAP certification, we've got an independently certified way of measuring what we do on farm is in the animal's best interest. Link that with carbon benchmarking, link that with ecological outcome verification. We've then got a full profile of tools. When someone buys our lamb, they can tick a lot of boxes in welfare, environmentally, and it tastes really good. I think we've got a really good track record in improving profitability through increased productivity, where we growth rate, lambing percentage, coupled with a consumer focus. And those two need to go together. And really using that and telling our story. Our clients are coming on the ride. They're very proactive. There's no complacency in their role in the global food system.
We were already aware of, environmental concerns and stuff like that, but I think the trigger were the kids. They were not critical, but they were asking questions about why do we do that, and is cattle really good for the environment? And we decided that there's one sentence that we actually wrote down, which is, we want to produce cattle that they'd be proud to eat. Sylvie and Christophe Burr, we run a beef cattle operation near Maryborough in Queensland. We started by saying, okay, we've got to establish our carbon account. We couldn't produce what the cattle produced. We couldn't reduce, for example, electricity and stuff like that, so we completely solar, totally. But at the end of the day, we really had to find ways to sequester carbon. That was the shining light, get to carbon neutrality. To do that, we just started looking at the ERF, the Emission Reductions Fund, which is the governance body that actually regulates the carbon credit scheme. So to actually be issued carbon credit that proves that you actually have sequestered carbon, you need to run a method, an ERF approved method, which is actually law. Follow that method and then you're issued carbon credits that you can then use for whatever you want. So we started looking at methods. We looked at feeding nitrate supplements to cattle. We looked at avoided clearing of native vegetation. We looked at soil carbon, and we looked at beef herd management in detail. Many other methods, but those ones were the ones that are applicable to us. Beef nitrate supplements didn't work simply because the nitrate supplements never made it to the market. So the intention was that if you feed those supplements to cattle, it reduces their methane emissions. There's a lot of new options for that now. It's a field of research which is exploding. Well, hopefully we're going to see a commercial product applicable to grazing very soon. Then we looked at avoided clearing. We looked at it first through a carbon service provider. We were too small for them. So the avoided clearing is basically you have an area of native vegetation that you could clear and put to pasture, and you're actually not doing that. You're actually keeping the trees and keeping the trees growing to sequester that carbon into the trees. So you need to figure out how much carbon you do have in your trees, which is done using a computer program, FullCam. So we had to learn how to do that. To actually register a project, you have to map where your project is going to be in a very precise fashion. You have to exclude dams, exclude houses, exclude laneways and power line easement and stuff like that. So it has to be done in a special geographic format. Also that we had to do our carbon account in the first place, so we had to learn carbon accounting. To make sure that we did understand it well and we actually had the skills to do things properly, we went through formal training. So that was the avoided clearing project. But on top of it, we wanted to put biodiversity benefits. We had gotten a lot more sophisticated in our thinking about sustainability, and it got beyond carbon neutrality. We wanted essentially to produce beef that is sustainable. And by sustainable, I mean we could do what we do forever, and it would not take any resources away from the planet and from nature. It goes beyond carbon. It means that we have to maintain that in the way it used to be, which is what the Land Restoration Fund is about, is a Queensland initiative, and I'm sure there's the same in every state, that actually pays you for attaching those core benefits, biodiversity, vegetation conditions, etc., to a carbon project. The business case for us was, do we clear that land and put cattle on it, or do we hope that carbon farming will give us the same income? Because it's all great to be carbon neutral, but at the end of the day we also have to make a living. So that was the balance for us. Do we devote a significant part of the farm, about 25%, to carbon farming, or do we clear it and put cattle on it? That was the big equation. At this point in time, whether we put cattle or we farm carbon is just as profitable. But the carbon farming, of course, has benefits for the planet, so it's a no-brainer decision. As much as avoided clearing is an absolute no-brainer, as long as it makes sense financially, and it does make sense. Soil carbon is a little bit more complicated. There are costs associated with implementing a soil carbon project, so it's real cash out, and the benefits are a lot more fickle. Sequestering carbon in a tree is easy. The tree grows, and that's it. So unless it burns down, unless there's an event and you've got a wildfire, etc., unless you lose that tree, the carbon's here. Carbon in soil goes up and down. When there's rainfall and the beautiful grass pushes roots into the soil, it stores carbon. But if there's a drought, immediately the microbes eat that carbon and release it into the atmosphere. So it goes up and down, and it's very fickle, and it's very hard to guarantee that you're going to have a result. We've done all the math and looked at all the evidence, and we think that all in all we will be able to make it work financially. You get the benefits from carbon farming and sequestering carbon, which is great for the planet. Even if it's not worth financially because of the cost associated with it, you create profitability benefits in your cattle operation. By that I mean, if you look after your pasture well, if you plant legumes, if you make sure that you don't overgraze, all that is good for soil carbon. But it happens to be also good for cattle. We use the credits that we generate in 3 ways. Keep a part for us and to be carbon neutral. And that means you go to the ERF and you say, I want to cancel those carbon credits. This carbon has been stored and it's here to offset. That's where carbon neutrality is about. Then you're left with another set of offsets, which you can do whatever you want with. There are many ways to sell those offsets. One, which is to sell to the government, to the ERF themselves. One, which is to sell on the spot market, which is you sell them to whomever wants it. Typically, energy companies, airlines buy those offsets to offset their own emissions, which is why we've chosen to generate some funds from those extra offsets that we have by selling them to the Queensland government. Where we are now is what we call stage 1. We're just as profitable as we were. We sequester carbon in the trees, right? And we, at current carbon prices, we can generate funds to go to stage 2. And stage 2 is we sequester carbon in the trees and in the soil. We are still profitable, and we generate biodiversity benefits. So has it been worthwhile? Yes, it has. Even where we are now, we haven't done stage 2 yet, but even where we are now, still profitable, and we have carbon credits to be carbon neutral in both cases. My advice to anyone who wants to try, and everybody should, is talk to your network, find someone who is ready to explain to you what it takes. Whether it's a carbon service aggregator, whether it's a friend, whether it's any advisor that you can find someone who can actually explain it to you. There are lots of resources now. Sites like FarmLab, like SIBO Lab. Looksee as well is a really good resources, and all that is free. You can have a good handle on what does your property look like from a carbon perspective from those tools. Start the journey. It'll be a bit of a discovery. When you look at the result, it's absolutely worth it.